Thank you very much for this introduction and the invitation to be advocate of the devil here today. I'm very pleased to meet you all. I'm going to talk about this subject from a media research angle because this is my field. I'm not a military expert by no means. But I do know something about media coverage of war and conflicts. I've done a lot of research and published on that. And this is why I became interested in this topic. Okay. Sorry about that. This quotation here is, this is, I guess, why I was asked to come here. This was from an article I wrote in Dagbladet, and the background was this event. As you all remember, the horrible attack on the consulate in Benghazi, where several people, including the ambassador, was killed. And I was amazed by how this story was framed in the news media. Immediately, the first few days, it was linked to this issue that even Norwegian Broadcasting Company, in their news, framed on this film by Florida Pastor Terry Jones' innocence of Muslims. And Obama's PR people, they sold the story as that. It was presented that globally for many days. Eventually, the opposition in Congress and other places picked up on this and came up with a debate on the real issue, which of course was lack of security and the background for this attack. No, this is not working. I'm sorry, this is not working now. The background was that there was no demonstrations in Benghazi on the war on this movie. There were no demonstrations at all. There were some in Cairo. What's that? Yeah, but it's not working either. It's totally locked. Okay.
Can you stop?
I'll try this one. Okay. But Al-Qaeda took credit for the attack, and it was not a spontaneous attack by hordes of fanatic Muslims. It was a well-coordinated, highly sophisticated military attack with high weapon on the compound itself. And Al-Qaeda took the honor for it, or blame, or what you will call it, and explicitly in some communications said this was the revenge for the Al-Qaeda leader, originally from Libya, by the way. Al-Libi was his name, who was killed during a drone attack in Pakistan. That's a total different story. Why did Obama and his people have this spin? I don't know. Perhaps because they wanted attention away of lack of security. Perhaps they wanted to see not the problem, the chaotic problem in Libya. I don't know, but they obviously did not want attention around the drone war. And one of the many discussions in the United States and other places is the lack of transparency. in the procedures, in the legal issues. And this is one of the reasons why it's difficult for the press to cover this also. So this is why one of the reasons why I am interested in the media coverage of this phenomenon. So I did a small study that I'm going to talk about. I did a comparative study of Aftenposten, the Norwegian big morning newspaper, and New York Times. It's not a big survey, but I covered how they covered the drone issue for half a year, and were particularly interested in how the legal issue were framed, since obviously the legal issues are disputed. So it should be potential interested for journalists and the media. Let's see if this is working now. No? Okay, so this was the research questions. Did they, in the daily basis, as they reported news, reflect on the legal issues in editorials, commentaries, and did it occur in the op-ed pages? I will not use much time, but I can say two things about this. There were two similar trends in New York Times and Aftenposten. It was the daily news brief in the drones in the war on terror and on attacks on Al-Qaeda. That was the dominated story. There was other technology story, human use, etc. There was one in this period, editorial, both in New York Times and Aftenposten, both were some kind of critical angle on it, also not so much on the legal issues, but some worry about the long-term consequences. One big difference, there were little debate in Aftenposten, a lot of extremely interesting debate op-ed in New York Times. There you really had the discussions, the legal debates, the political debates, the really scholarly, well-written. So I learned a lot about drones reading these op-eds. So in Aftenposten, the same kind, the most stories were on the daily basis on the attack from time to time. Not much on the civil casualties, not very much on military technology, but still. So the pattern was more, but less debate in Aftenposten. So how does this typical story look like? This is a typical headline of such a news story. And you hear it if you listen to the radio. Another attack in Yemen, 3 Al-Qaeda suspects being killed, etc. So what worries me is in this pattern is that the difficult issues are not addressed in the daily news reporting. And let's say that potentially this drone war turned out to be not acceptable legally after all the investigation and discussion. What kind of function does these day-to-day news, just matter of fact, very short articles, without asking the questions? I think it should be the media role to ask the critical question, but they are not questioned in this way of covering it. So this does not mean that the debate is not there, because, as I mentioned, it is from time to time some critical articles. This is example in this period where Aftenposten actually had a critical address of the issue after this was a subject in UN. And interestingly enough, this is written by Alf Ole Ask, the foreign correspondent in in the United States, and he asked in an email a question to the then Foreign Minister Støre about the legal issues. Støre gives a very vague answer, but some kind of worrying around that this must be taken seriously, not any clear conclusions, but it's an attempt to address the issue. So when the third research question was asked, I would say overall, because of this way of news reporting, I don't think they in the daily news live up to the expected watchdog role as critical reporting. But in the letters, there were a lot of criticism, including this very, very harsh article by former President Jimmy Carter, who is, as you can read yourself, very much both the drone war, the use of it, and says later in the article that in his mind this is violating 10 of the points in UN Declaration of Human Rights. And I find it interesting and a bit ironic that then we have two presidents. One has escalated the war on terror, won a Nobel Peace Prize, and a critic also won a Nobel Peace Prize. Perhaps this can give something for the Nobel Committee to think about. But there you have a public debate, which is good. So, how, if you take Yemen as a case, how does New York Times report on this? Like in the political angle, like this story here, where Yemen's president has accepted the use, which of course is extremely important for the whole legitimacy of the US to have a consent by the leaders from those countries. But if we look down to Yemen and look how it's framed there, we see a total different story. And Yemen Times is an English newspaper. It's mainstream. It's one of the biggest newspapers in Yemen. And they have a lot of critical articles based on interviewed with people in areas where the drones are struck, and some people might have been wounded, lost their property. And there's 2 points that occurs from time to time. One, in this article, the main point was that there was a lot of discontent with the president for giving this permission, because it was seen as a loss of the pride for Yemenite that he allowed attacks on Yemen soil. This was one argument. And the other was that these attacks help recruit Al-Qaeda because of the damage they do. These 2 kind of arguments are in the press. And those kind of arguments, I think we see very little of represented as arguments from the countries where they are used in our press. There's another issue when it comes to Yemen. It's about the security of justice and the legal process around it. We all know this guy. It was taken in the courtroom. At the time, most of Norwegians, the press, politicians, were pretty well satisfied that we were able to have a decent trial, even for a guy like that. It was a process. It was good evidence. There was this issue of his sanity, of course. But overall, the conclusion was that this was a good thing for the Norwegian society. Even though he himself said that he would use the courtroom as a tribunal, and this right extremist greeting was stopped after a while, but he was still allowed to do that even in the courtroom. Many foreign journalists were really astonished that he was treated that well. So why bring in this issue? This other front page is about Dagbladet ran a story last summer that a Norwegian had joined Al-Qaeda in Yemen, volunteering and were training, and the Norwegian intelligence suspected he was about to plan a terrorist attack. Interestingly enough, there are some similarities in the background for these two guys. The Dagbladet did not mention his name, but they knew who he was. He said come from a middle-class, ordinary Norwegian family in the Bærum outside Oslo. Pretty much the same background as Behring Breivik himself, actually. So, potentially, we could have seen the headline, Norwegian killed by a drone in Yemen. Potentially, he, operating in those bases, could have been killed in a drone attack. That's not a wild guess. And my critical question, how would the Norwegian public have reacted to that? No trial. He had no criminal record whatsoever. Would it be okay for the Norwegian public that he was executed in that manner? I'll just leave the question. So the legal issues are important. Last spring term, I spent a sabbatical at Berkeley. I had time to do a lot of research, including go into Congress documents, and I found this interesting hearing in the Subcommittee on National Security from 28th of April 2010. In the public debate in the United States, when I was there and elsewhere, it has been made a point that the Congress is very little into the picture about the whole drone issue, since CIA is mostly taking care of it. So it's not really the issue for the politicians, other than reports from time to time to get into it, which is regarded by critics as a problematic issue in itself. So what did this hearing do? They invited some of the best-known legal scholars in international law in United States, and they discussed some of the legal implications. And what astonished me was there was really agreement on all of those who talked that this was really a problematic issue. In the summary at the end, you can read yourself, it was expressed great concern about the legal issues among those who took part in the debate. And I did not see any press coverage of it, and I have not seen the Congress itself picking up on these issues, even if they express worry about it. Okay. But UN has expressed worry. Philip Alston, also a part of United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Summary, published a critical report. Here the issue of drones is mentioned, the legality is questioned. So I think that when heavy organs like Congress, UN, claim this concern. I'm a bit amazed that the press don't pick up it as raise it as a public debate themselves, not just in the op-eds. So this is my my concern. There was this. There were some in Norwegian press also debate when this report, Living Under Drones, were published. I've read it. It's, in my mind, a solid academic work from well-known academic institutions in Stanford and New York University. There's a lot of interesting debate on the legal issues, but since I'm asked to talk about the reaction in those countries that are affected, I will just say a few words about the humanitarian effects explained in the report. I just show you the headlines here on this point, chapter 3. If you see those headlines, and those dates indicated are the dates where a group of interviewers in this research team went into the villages in this area, talked to people who were affected on a daily basis, and got their stories. And the concern in the report is that it has great impact in a negative sense on the daily life of the people living in that area. One worry is lack of willingness to go into assistance of those who have been hurt because of the fear of a second attack, which they had experienced, allegedly because the second attack will perhaps attack all the co-workers of Al-Qaeda people. But if it's a mistaken hit, some civilian might be hurt from that reason. There's direct damage on property. There's damage on the mental health of the people in the area because of fear. They hear the summing, they express that it creates an unhealthy environment for the children. It has impact on education because some are afraid to send their children to school. There are impact on local traditions because to show in public, people are reluctant to do that in this period. So it has widely implications according to the report. And if you look at this map taken for Journal Atlantic, it's not worried that this in this area where it's not that the drones are used in wide area. They are very much concentrated in specific area in North Waziristan, and then of course this is concentrated to a limited space where the harshness around this are more difficult. And this worries is expressed also in the report. As a problem for the daily life. One explicit report was from which has been public in Pakistan since a Pakistani human rights group has filed a lawsuit on base of it, where a lot of people were killed, and the lawsuit is on behalf of this father who has then been, the family has lost its income, etc., etc. So these are specific cases that give these victims a human face. And I think this is necessary to understand the real anger in Pakistan against this. The parliament in Pakistan has reflected it and asked the drones to stop. There is some sort of crisis between United States and Pakistan. And I think since US is dependent on the long-term cooperation with Pakistan, also in this war on terror, I think this must be taken extremely seriously. So one of the questions must be asked, is even the results in killing Al-Qaeda is remarkable, no doubt about it. But the side effects, are they of a character that should be used to ask the question whether this in long term is an efficient way to fight terrorism? Or does it create new recruits as a by result? This is one issue. Another report came just a month ago from the think tank Council on Foreign Relations, Center for Preventive Action, asking a lot of similar questions. They have tried to summarize the estimates. I heard Berg-Tora said that these are, of course, different sources. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism, Long War Journal, and New American Foundation have different kind of figures. But since there are no official figures given out, how should one estimate what the actual deaths are, both in terms of suspected terrorists, but also civilians? So this is a conservative estimate based on a total number of 3,400, which of 401, and in this case 12% civilian. So I think this should also be an issue raised by the media to discuss publicly. Is this the price we must pay? A couple of weeks ago, it was announced that the UN Special Rapporteur will now, in the UN system, raise this issue as a case. So then it probably will be an open discussion where these issues that I now talk about is discussed. But in this report, this think tank suggests that the US politicians and the press should take this seriously, because there's a growing huge protest against this globally, not only the places where these are direct hit. But if you see up there, there's pulls from Egypt, Turkey, Brazil, where there is a big resistance against this warfare, and it must be dealt with by the UN, by the US society. So, and they come up as a conclusion with some precautions that should be taken by the press to raise this issue, and to by the politicians themselves to reflect, including the relation between the public, Congress, and UN. So I will not repeat this, but I can give this as an opportunity to you to reflect on these issues, and perhaps even discuss them over dinner. And if anybody wants to argue against me in the bar, I'll be happy to do that later. Thank you for your attention.